All right, today's No Red Ink is going to have you look at the difference between an independent clause and a subordinate clause. And once you have mastered those, you're going to be looking at 4 different types of sentence structures. So your No Red Ink practice is having you identify simple sentences versus fragments, complex sentences versus fragments, and then they're really looking at how to punctuate those 4 different types of sentences. Okay, so just a reminder, an independent clause is a clause that includes a subject, a verb, and it expresses a complete thought. That would be a complete sentence if it was standing alone. On the opposite side, we have dependent clauses. These are known as subordinate clauses. They are reliant on an independent clause. They have got to be attached to an independent clause. A subordinate clause will have a subject and a verb, but it will not express a complete thought. So it would be a fragment on its own. All right, let's look at these 4 and determine whether they are independent or subordinate. Number 1, Belleville East has welcomed students since 1966. Do I have a subject, right? Belleville East. Do I have a verb or verb phrase? Has welcomed. Did it complete the thought? Yes, it did. So that would be an independent clause. That would be a complete sentence on its own. Number 2, whoever attends Belleville East for 4 years. That did not finish the thought, right? So obviously that would be our subordinate clause. Number 3, Belleville East student population is nearly 2,500. Ooh, I have an extra 0 there, sorry. 2,500. We have our verb, we have our subject, it completes a thought, check, 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 independent. Okay, notice this 4th one, it starts with because. That's going to be one of our awubis words, one of our subordinating conjunctions. So we know that's going to create a subordinate clause, so we know it needs to be attached to an independent clause. Because there are nearly 150 teachers, right, that does not complete a thought. You would need a comma, and then you would need to add on an independent clause. So hopefully you got those right. We have 4 types of sentence structures. Easiest one, first one here is a simple sentence. So a simple sentence has just one independent clause. It does not have any subordinate clauses. So in this example, Ms. Zapp and Ms. Rotterman worked at a golf course. We have a subject, we have a verb, we complete a thought. Notice your simple sentence can have a compound subject, right? It's Ms. Zapp and Ms. Rotterman. It's still just one independent clause. Then we have a compound sentence. That's when you have 2 or more independent clauses, but you still don't have any subordinate clauses. So Ms. Zapp and Ms. Rotterman worked at the golf course, right? That would be an independent clause. That could hang on its own. Look at the next underlined segment. They were not very good at golf. That is also an independent clause. It has a subject, a verb. It completes a thought. So we have 2 independent clauses here. Remember from last week's No Red Ink, when you have 2 independent clauses, you can combine them with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Again, there were several ways you could combine those, but this is one. That would be a compound sentence because it has 2 independent clauses. The third type of sentence is a complex sentence, so you'll have at least one you'll have one independent clause and at least one subordinate clause. So I color coordinated these for you. Notice our awubis word, although, right? We have our subordinating conjunction here. That lets us know that's creating a subordinate clause or a dependent clause. Although Ms. Zapp and Ms. Rotterman worked at the golf course, right? You couldn't leave that by itself. That's not completing a thought. So you have to add a comma if that dependent clause comes first, and then attach it to the independent clause. They were not very good at golf. Finally, your 4th and final type of sentence is a compound complex sentence. So in this scenario, you will have 2 or more independent clauses and then at least one subordinate clause. So we have that same subordinate clause from earlier. Again, we already know it's going to be a subordinate clause because we have that word although. That was one of our awubis subordinating conjunction words. So although Ms. Zapp and Ms. Rotterman worked at the golf course, we'll need a comma there, okay? They were not very good at golf. That's our first independent clause. They, subject, were not, verb phrase, good at golf, completes the thought, okay? Nor did they sign up for lessons, right? They did not sign up for lessons. That would be our second independent clause, and we are connecting those, remember, with our comma and our coordinating conjunction. So make sure you feel comfortable with the punctuation. That's really what No Red Ink is going to test you on today. And then being able just to tell, is this an independent clause or is it a fragment, which would be a subordinate clause, okay? So if you get stuck, remember, use the lesson button, use the hint button, but if you continue to get stuck after that, make sure you reach out to me.